You're listening to Rubble and Ruin, Welcome to the End, a dystopian zombie story told in 12 parts, written by Jarrett Rush and produced by SciFi Serials.com. Part 8. Caroline is up early and scouting Fair Park for an open space to bury her mom. I have been out looking for something to dig with. I'll do the heavy lifting today, as it were. The wailers have done us a favor. They've broken into just about everything, and that includes maintenance rooms. It took some hunting, but I was able to find a shovel. It's not much, smaller than I would have liked, but it will work for our purposes. I am back at camp. I've also found a few packets of instant coffee. I'm boiling water and Caroline comes around the corner. I walked this entire park, and I can't find a better spot than the one I thought about last night. It's just around the corner. Come on, I'll show you. Coffee first? I hold out a mug for her. She takes it and sits. How are you doing? I ask. She shrugs and looks over at Maggie. I found a shovel, I tell her. The ground should still be wet enough that the digging will be easy. She nods. We finish our coffee in silence. Caroline sets her empty mug on the ground, then gestures with her head like, "Follow me." "It's this way," she says. We walk a few hundred feet west of where we've camped to an open spot that has a few picnic tables and a couple of tall, thick trees that somehow survived the initial assault. "She'd like it," Caroline says. "I figure we can bury her this way." She uses her hand to indicate a position that's perpendicular to the concrete path. "That way," she continues. "She can look to her right and see the Ferris wheel. She can look to her left and can see Dallas." I'm just following orders and begin to dig, but Caroline stops me after a moment. She steps out to the middle of the open area and surveys the view. "Do it here," she says. So I do. It takes me close to an hour to dig a hole deep enough. I don't want to put Maggie or Walter into a shallow grave that's going to be disturbed by whatever animals take over this place once we're all gone. There are already menacing packs of dogs wandering around. Caroline comes back to check on me. I wipe sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm and tell her that I'm ready whenever she is. Then I start digging a hole for Walter. I don't do it near Maggie's plot. Somehow, it just doesn't feel like I should. The two were friends out of necessity, not choice. I don't think they disliked each other, but burying them side by side feels like too much. It takes me a little longer to dig a spot for Walter, but Caroline hasn't returned. I head back to our spot and see her crying again. Deep sobs, bent over her mother's chest. I turn and walk a loop around the park. It's crumbling more, like the wailers have accelerated the timeline on when all of this was going to come down. And I'm under no impressions that it wasn't going to come down. Everything will, eventually, either by nature or by force. There was a lagoon area that is now filled with debris and floating trash. I turn right and get a good look at the food court. There used to be tall and narrow towers that went up the front of the building and extended beyond the roof. Those are gone. Torn down somehow by wailers. The blue awnings that covered the midway, at least those that had been still intact, are shreds now. For our purposes, this place has lost some of its practical value. And emotionally, after finding Maggie, all of my connection to Fair Park is gone. I don't want to stay. I can't stay. I have to leave, but I can't abandon Caroline. Not now. I come back to camp and see Caroline. She has her back to me and is working on something that's in her lap. Her hands are busy. Magic, I'm thinking. But I get closer and see, no, she's creating a marker, some sort of headstone for her mom. "Do you want to make one for Walter?" she asks. I wouldn't even know where to begin the process, I tell her. I didn't know Walter other than from here. I let him sit in my chair, but that's about the nicest thing I'd done for him. "That's fine," she says, "but he should have something. He can't just go into a hole in the ground. I'll make it. If it's just going to be something simple, then I can put it together." I sit. What do I have to work with? "Whatever you can find." She has a wide, flat stone in her lap and has painted something on the front. It's an abstract of colors in a looping swirl. It looks vaguely magical. "Pretty," I say as I stand. I'm about to dig in the bushes that line our path to find a rock of my own, when I remember that the wailers have done most of my excavation for me. Thanks, she says. Her cheeks are still damp. She's been quietly crying. I go to the nearest pile of rubble and find something that looks as little like broken concrete as possible, then come back to sit next to Caroline. I push small tins of paint around looking for black. Where'd you find this stuff? Over there. She points to a face painting stand on the midway. The door had been bent and broken to disengage the lock, then left open after the contents were looted. You do that? I ask. I need it in. I pick up a brush and dip it into the black paint. I letter Walter at the top of my hunk of concrete. I don't know his age or his last name, so below that I just write the year, 2019. I think for a moment, then write one more thing in the space under the date, Survivor. I hold my stone out in front of me and assess my creation. I'm happy. Caroline is still concentrating on the rock in her lap. I take mine over to the hole I dug for Walter and situate it at the top, adjusting it so it's centered square. I wait a moment before heading back over to Caroline. I am trying for now to give her space. I don't know if it's what she needs or wants, but I haven't asked. I don't know how. I know her emotions are raw. I see that she's been crying. And why not? Her entire world is now different. And that's on top of it all going end over end with the attacks. She's alone. Part of me, I suppose, is frustrated that I can't predict her reactions anymore. Not like I could a day or two ago. She was feisty and bored. I could tell you with some certainty what she was going to say to my questions, or how she'd respond to my remarks. It wasn't so hard to put myself back in that teenage headspace. But now, after the whaler attack and her mom dying, I didn't know what she'd say, or what she'd do, because I couldn't imagine, even in my wildest thoughts, being her. She was dealing with things that I would have never been able to handle at that age. I go back to camp, and Caroline has finished with her rock. It's nice, I say. She would have liked it. Caroline doesn't stop looking at her creation. I hope so. She pauses. I think so. I'm going to transition Walter over. Spend a few more minutes with your mom. We'll move her over after I get back. She nods, then looks up to me. Let me help, she says. I tell her no, to stay here, and she doesn't insist. We've wrapped Walter in a blanket that we found over at the empty horse stables. Bundled like this, he's easier to carry but still heavy. I take slow steps over to the grave. I lay him on the edge, then jump in. I pull him into the hole with me. It's only a few feet deep, but not so shallow that it should be disturbed. The bottom isn't finished smooth, and he lays in there awkwardly, sort of half on his side. I adjust him so he's as flat as possible, then jump out and start throwing dirt in. When I'm done, the dirt lays in a round mound on top of him, just like some fresh grave you see in a cartoon. It's an oddly familiar sight. Thanks, pop culture and your casual references to death. I go back to where Caroline is and can see that she's already wrapped Maggie in another blanket. It was one that Caroline picked specifically. It's a Native American pattern of some sort, very angular and geometric. It's all golds and oranges and reds. Caroline spent some time pulling the old hay and other debris from its weave, and it's clear that she took some time getting Maggie wrapped. Extra fabric is tucked neatly away. She looks like a young, sleeping child swaddled tight. Maggie's head isn't yet covered, and I can hear Caroline talking to her. I slow my steps, but she hears something crunch under my feet and turns. She wipes a tear, then stands. I'm ready, she says. There's no hurry. We have to do it at some point. I've said my goodbyes. I nod and bend to pick up Maggie. I grab the fabric that's laying near her head and start to pull it over her face. Caroline puts a hand on my shoulder, and I stop. She bends down and kisses her mother's forehead. For the first time, I cry. Big tears wet my cheeks, and I can feel my chest wanting to turn this to sobs. I fight the wave of emotions back as I finish wrapping Maggie. I pick her up, and my tears fall into wet spots on her blanket as I carry her over to the grave I've dug. I go through the same procedure with her as I did with Walter. She lays flatter. I climb from the grave and begin piling dirt back into the hole. Caroline places the stone she created earlier at the head of the grave, then begins to sing. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. Her voice is a bit thin, and it's understandably unsteady. But it's pleasant. She continues to sing a variety of old church songs that I recognize until we can't see Maggie anymore. That's when she leaves. I finish the job, then step back and look at our small graveyard. Just 2 plots, but that's a third of the population of our camp, and it should be bigger. But Caroline never told me where Britt and Bethany were. Once I get graves for them dug, it'll double our number of dead.